Hi everyone, my name is Olivia, and this is my little speech for the Climate Change and Human Rights Women panel. So I will just introduce myself. My name is Olivia Karp. I have in this video message from Canada. I have a bachelor's degree in political science and a master's degree in international public policy from Canada as well. And I just kind of want to talk about based kind of my own kind of knowledge on the topics of human rights and climate change and the impacts it has on women. I want to more so focus it from a migration standpoint than more so just kind of from a human rights standpoint. So I'm kind of going to explain to you what is climate migration. Climate migration is the impact climate change has on the migration of people. That can mean areas like the Pacific Islands, which is low-lying tides, or it can mean areas where nations are having issues mitigating climate change, like Indonesia, because of the lack of resources. From these factors, really goes to show the impact climate change has, not so much on developing countries, but also developed. So it happens everywhere. And how does this pertain to women? Well, women can be the most vulnerable when it comes to the impacts of climate change. And that's where our human rights framework comes into. I think it's very important to address how does the human rights framework address the impact climate change has on women when they are on the move and when they are displaced because of climate change. Such organizations like OCHA and IOM have come up with some kind of definitions and recommendations on how to deal with this topic. So definitely say number one, climate change can further exacerbate women when they're on the move, mostly in vulnerable settings. That can be when a disaster strikes or a tornado or because of a conflict and so on. It can also impact women in rural areas like Indigenous places in British Columbia or Ontario, Canada, and other places in the world that are rural. But kind of what comes with this is it impacts all women and girls, not just older women, but a variety. I think it's very good to understand that when a person chooses to move, they usually choose for different types of factors. That can be climate change, just an extra pressure. It's not just because of kind of climate change, but it can be for economic reasons, better outcomes for their family, depending on the neighboring town they're going to, other country, and so on. But I think that we need to get here is that climate change and human rights have an important interlocking together. I think this really comes from down the fact that climate change is a human right, and that this needs to be the first thing when it comes to approaching this topic. And that when people are on the move, especially women and young girls, it is their human right to move, or it's their human right to stay, or it's their human right to address the impacts of climate change and come up with some solution. So according to OCHA and IOM, they have some suggestions on really how to kind of mitigate these impacts. I think first of all, it's important to kind of understand how climate change impacts women on the move and causes them to be displaced, and to really kind of state to have a role in this by addressing different frameworks, coming together with different stakeholders to address the impacts that this has directly on women and young girls. And it's vital for them to be on the seat at the table, but also hear their perspectives in this. I will also say that to ensure there's a necessary capacity to adapt to climate change. Let's say women and young girls decide not to move because they like where they live, because of cultural reasons, they have affiliation with the land and so on, economic outcomes that they like. So countries, states, or civil societies, or people just living in that area should come together and understand how do we adapt to climate change and how do we prevent further displacement and the migration of people coming so on. But really kind of comes down to that is the accountability measures and the remedies for human rights. As I said, people who choose to move is a human right. Climate change is a human right. Addressing the impacts of climate change is a human right. So maybe it's important to use such frameworks or declarations like the Human Rights Declaration, or other things maybe like kind of the Pacific Island Framework or other kind of migration and refugee frameworks out there as a way to show the way accountability can start when it comes to the migration of women and young girls, and displacement, the impacts displacement has, and what accountability measures do those frameworks set or other policy sets in order to relay accountable. How do we adapt to climate change, but also how do we address the harms that climate change has on women and young girls directly, and maybe we can use those frameworks as a way to kind of address them or come in with policies or capacity building sessions to bring about recommendations and coming together. I think another thing is the importance of mobilizing resources as a way to have sustainable and human rights-based development when it comes to adapting to climate change and addressing the impacts migration, displacement has on young girls and women. This can come from collectively coming together, understanding the impacts, but also understanding the obligation that not only states, civil societies, but women and young girls have in this space to voice their opinions and understand why their voices matter. I think also what's the most important here is really kind of seeing this from an equity lens. Equity lens helps to really kind of bridge the gap. How does this affect women and young girls directly in more of a holistic but also inclusive point of view? And I think that's very vital if we were to bring women and young girls to the table to address these concerns, but also to implement programs or projects or policies to kind of ensure there's equity in climate action to adapt and maybe prevent further displacement or to make the move of migration easier. And lastly is, I think, probably one of the most important is that to protect, basically, how do we protect women and young girls from future climate impacts? And how does the human rights framework address those impacts? And that's where I think the equity lens comes in order to address that. So those are some of the kind of recommendations and insights from both ILM and OCHA, but also kind of from my own point of view on the subject. I think currently going forward, I think it's really important for you to further educate yourself on this topic, but also maybe come together as a collective to develop future solutions when it comes to the impacts of climate mobility and migration have on young women and girls, more so from a human rights standpoint, but also equity. Thank you.